The Millionaire CEO was proposing to his fiancée when two little girls walked up and said, "You're our dad." Ethan Cole was already on one knee when the city seemed to quiet around him. Not because the music stopped, not because the crowd disappeared, but because for the first time that night, he wasn't thinking 3 steps ahead. He was simply there, looking up at Claire. The rooftop stretched wide above the city, glass rails catching reflections of light below. Conversations had softened, phones lowered, attention drawn toward a single moment. Ethan liked moments like this, planned, timed, predictable. And yet standing there now, something in his chest didn't feel as controlled as it should. Claire didn't rush him. She never did. She stood with a quiet confidence, her hands loosely together, her eyes steady on his face, not the ring, not the crowd. Just him. "You're thinking again," she said gently. Ethan let out a small breath. "Just making sure I don't mess this up." He wished he believed that as easily as she did. Ethan straightened just a little, then opened the ring box. The diamond caught the light, but he didn't look at it. "Claire," he said, his voice quieter now, more real than rehearsed. "Before you, everything made sense on paper." She tilted her head slightly, listening. "Everything was structured, safe, exactly how I planned it. And now?" she asked. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Now it actually feels like something I want. Not just something that works." That was the closest he had ever come to saying it without filters. Something softened in her expression, the kind of softness you don't question. He lowered himself fully, steady now. "I don't know what every day ahead looks like," he continued, "but I know I want you in all of them." A quiet stillness settled around them. Even the city felt distant. "Claire, excuse me." The voice was small, so small it barely fit Fee a moment. Ethan didn't react. Most people didn't. Moments like this weren't supposed to be interrupted. "Excuse me, sir?" This time it reached him. Not loud, just certain. Ethan paused mid-breath. His hand, still holding the ring box, stilled completely. Slowly, he turned. 2 little girls stood a few feet away. They weren't dressed for the evening. They weren't part of the crowd. One held the other's hand tightly, as if letting go wasn't an option. The older one stood a little straighter. The younger one looked unsure, but stayed close. Ethan rose to his feet, confusion tightening his expression. "Are you lost?" he asked, calm, measured. The older girl shook her head. "No." Her voice didn't shake. She stepped forward slightly and said it. "You're our dad." No hesitation. No doubt. Just truth, at least to her. For a second, nothing moved. Not Ethan, not Claire, not the people watching, unsure whether this was part of something or something breaking. Claire's gaze shifted from the girls to Ethan, carefully, watching him, not them, because his reaction mattered more. Ethan's expression didn't crack, but something behind it did. "I think you're mistaken," he said, calm, controlled, just slightly firmer than necessary. "I don't have children." The younger girl glanced up at the older one, uncertain now. But the older one didn't step back. "And if you're thinking this is just confusion, stay with me. Because this moment, this is where everything he built starts to shift. And what comes next isn't something he can control." For a moment, Ethan expected hesitation, a correction, a parent rushing in, someone laughing it off as a mistake. None of that happened. The 2 girls stayed exactly where they were. The older one kept her eyes on him, steady in a way that didn't match her age. The younger one shifted slightly, fingers tightening around her sister's hand. They weren't unsure. They were waiting. The rooftop hadn't returned to normal. It had stalled. People looked at each other quietly, unsure whether to look away or keep watching. Conversations didn't resume. No one stepped in. Because this didn't feel like something random anymore. It felt personal. Claire hadn't moved. She stood just behind Ethan now, close enough to hear everything, far enough to observe clearly. Her attention wasn't on the girls. It was on him. Ethan straightened fully, adjusting his posture as if control could be restored through it. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, voice even. "I think you've confused me with someone else." The younger girl's grip tightened again. "But Mom said—" She stopped. Not because she didn't want to speak. Because the older one gently squeezed her hand. A quiet signal. Wait. The older girl took a small step closer, not aggressive, not hesitant, just enough to close the distance. We didn't get it wrong, she said. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He wasn't used to being questioned like this, especially not in a moment he had carefully shaped. What's your name? He asked, keeping his tone measured. Emma. She didn't ask his. She already believed she knew. The younger one leaned forward just a little. I told you it was him, she whispered, not quietly enough. Emma didn't look at her, but her grip tightened again, steadying, grounding. Ethan caught that small exchange, and something about it didn't feel rehearsed. It felt lived. Ethan exhaled slowly. Where are your parents? He asked. Emma answered without hesitation. Our mom is here. A pause. Then, her name is Lily, that was it. No build-up, no warning, just a name. Something in Ethan's expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. It was small, too small for most people to notice, but Claire saw it immediately. The slight delay before he spoke, the way his shoulders didn't fully relax, the way his focus slipped. She stepped a little closer. Dropped briefly, then returned to the girls. Where is she? He asked. His voice was still calm, but it wasn't as steady as before. Emma didn't point immediately. She looked at him for a second longer, as if deciding something. Then she stepped aside. Sophie followed her lead, moving just enough to clear the space between them, and suddenly there was a path, a clear line of sight past them. Ethan's attention shifted forward. Whatever confidence he had walked into this night with wasn't leading anymore. And just like that, the moment he thought would define his future was no longer his to control, because someone from his past was about to step back into it. And this time, there was no walking away unnoticed. Lily. The name didn't echo. It didn't need to. It landed once, and that was enough. Ethan didn't see the rooftop anymore, didn't hear the quiet crowd or feel the weight of the ring still in his hand, because suddenly, he was somewhere else, years back, before everything became structured, before every decision had a purpose behind it, before he convinced himself that control was the same thing as stability. Back then, Ethan still planned his life. Just not this tightly. He was ambitious, focused, already building something for himself, but there were still aces in his life that weren't accounted for, spaces he didn't rush to fill, spaces where something unexpected could happen. That's where she came in. It wasn't dramatic, no grand entrance, no perfect setup. She was just there, sitting cross-legged on the hood of her car, arguing with someone over the phone. You can't just cancel like that, she said, frustrated but not angry. That's not how plans work. Ethan had passed by, barely paying attention, until she ended the call, looked up, and caught him glancing. What? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Nothing, he replied. She smiled slightly. You looked like you had an opinion. I don't comment on situations I don't understand. Then you must stay quiet a lot, she said, sliding off the car. That was the first time he almost smiled. Lily didn't follow patterns. That was the first thing he noticed. Plans changed around her. Time stretched differently when she was involved. She didn't rush conversations, didn't filter what she said just to make it easier for someone else to hear. You think too far ahead, she told him once, leaning back in her chair. And you don't think far enough, he replied. She shrugged. Maybe, but I don't miss what's right in front of me either. He didn't respond, because that one stayed with him longer than it should have. With Lily, things didn't feel scheduled. They just happened. Conversations that started without purpose and lasted longer than expected. Silences that weren't uncomfortable. Decisions made in the moment, not after weighing every possible outcome. You ever just do something without planning it first? She asked one evening. No, Ethan said. Not even once? He thought about it, then shook his head. She laughed, not at him, but at the idea. That sounds exhausting. It works, he said. For what? She asked. He didn't answer that either. Lily wasn't impressed by what he was building, not in the way others were. She didn't ask about numbers, didn't care who he was meeting or what deals he was closing. She paid attention to different things. You leave early, she said one day. From where? Anywhere that starts to feel unpredictable. That's not true. She looked at him, not arguing, just waiting. And that was worse, because he couldn't prove her wrong. One afternoon they sat side by side, doing nothing in particular. No phones, no distractions. just time passing. "You know what I like about you?" she said. Ethan glanced at her. "What?" "You're not as put together as you pretend to be." He almost laughed. "That's not usually a compliment. It is when it means you're real," she replied. He looked away, not because he disagreed, because something about that made him uncomfortable. It came quietly, not during an argument, not during a big moment, just in between. "You're going to leave one day," Lily said. Ethan frowned slightly. "I'm not planning to." "That's not what I asked." He turned toward her. "Stop fitting into how you want them." "That's not how I—" She shook her head gently. "You don't even hear yourself when you do that." "Do what?" "Turn everything into something you can control." He didn't respond. Because again, she wasn't wrong. It didn't happen all at once. That would have been easier to recognize. Instead, it was small things, missed calls, shorter conversations, plans that kept getting pushed back. Ethan told himself it was temporary, that once things settled, he'd have time again. But time didn't wait, and neither did she. One evening, Lily sat across from him, quieter than usual. "You don't have to explain it," she said. "Explain what?" "This," she gestured lightly between them. "You already chose." "That's not true." "Then why does it feel like I'm the only part of your life you haven't figured out how to keep?" Ethan opened his mouth, then stopped, because there wasn't a clean answer, and he didn't do well with things that didn't have one. Lily watched him for a moment longer, then nodded slightly. Not angry, not upset, just certain, and somehow that was worse. The rooftop hadn't disappeared. It had just been waiting, and now Ethan was back, only this time Lily wasn't a memory anymore. There wasn't a moment you could point to and say, that's where it went wrong. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just distance. The kind that builds slowly enough to ignore until it's the only thing left. Ethan still showed up, still answered calls, still said the right things. But something in him had already started pulling away. At first, Lily didn't say anything. She noticed, of course, how conversations ended a little quicker, how his attention drifted even when he was right in front of her, how later started replacing now. "You're busy," she said once, not accusing, just observing. "I've always been busy," Ethan replied. "Not like this." He didn't ask what she meant, because part of him already knew. Lily stopped filling the silence. That was new. She didn't push for plans, didn't ask where things were going. She simply waited. Not for him to choose her, but for him to notice that she was still there. Ethan mistook that quiet for understanding. It wasn't. It was distance learning how to settle in. It happened on an ordinary evening. Nothing special about it, which made it impossible to ignore. "You don't have to stay if you've already left," Lily said. Ethan looked up. "I'm here. Are you?" she asked. There was no edge in her voice. "Just honesty. I've just been dealing with a lot," he said. "I'm not asking you to explain your schedule," she replied softly. "I'm asking if I still matter in it." That was harder, because it wasn't about time. It was about priority. Ethan leaned back slightly, searching for the right response. Something clear, something reasonable, something that would settle this. "I just need things to be stable right now," he said. Lily nodded once. "I know." And that was it. No argument, no pushback, because she understood what he didn't say. Stable didn't include her. A few days later, nothing changed, and that said everything. Lily didn't bring it up again, didn't try to hold on to something that was already slipping. When they saw each other, it was quieter, shorter, more careful, until one day, they didn't. No final conversation, no official ending, just a space where something used to be. Decisively, he told himself it was the right choice, that some things didn't fit into the life he was building, and for a while, that explanation worked, because he didn't look back, not long enough to see what he left behind, not long enough to ask what it cost, and definitely not long enough to realize that some things don't disappear when you walk away from them. They just wait. And now, back on that rooftop, they weren't waiting anymore. The city came back first, lights, voices, movement, all of it slowly returning, like nothing had changed. But for Ethan, everything had. He was still standing where he had turned, the ring no longer the center of the moment. Now it was something else entirely. Or rather, someone. For a second, there was only the space beyond the girls. Then, she moved, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. Lily stepped forward, not the same as before, not the girl who laughed easily and spoke without thinking. This version of her carried something quieter, something grounded, and it showed in the way she looked at him. Ethan didn't speak, didn't need to. Recognition doesn't ask permission, it just happens. Her face was older, yes, but not unfamiliar. If anything, clearer, like time had taken away everything unnecessary and left only what mattered. "You look," he started. Lily gave a small, knowing smile. "Different?" He nodded once. "Yeah." A pause. "In a way that matters." Her smile softened, but only slightly. "So do you," she said. Not as a compliment, not as a criticism, just an observation, the kind that lands because it's true, and just like before. He didn't know what to say to that. They stood a few steps apart, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to feel the years in between. Everything they didn't say filled that space. Not tension, not anger, just unfinished history. Ethan took a step forward, then stopped, as if unsure what came next. "You didn't tell me," he said. It came out lower than expected, more controlled than emotional, but still, heavier than he intended. Lily held his gaze. "I tried," that was all she said at Furfit. No defense, no explanation, just truth. Ethan's expression tightened slightly. "I would have—" "You were gone," she said gently, cutting in, not to argue, just to be clear. A pause, and after a while, "It didn't feel like you didn't know." Her voice softened just a little. "It felt like you chose not to." That landed harder than anything else. Because it wasn't said with anger. It was said with certainty. "That's not fair," Ethan replied. It was automatic. The kind of response that comes before you fully think it through. Lily tilted her head slightly. "Isn't it?" She didn't press further, didn't need to, because they both knew it wasn't about fairness. It was about what happened. Behind them, the world was still watching. But it didn't matter anymore. Not to Ethan, not to Lily, not even to the two girls standing quietly nearby. Because the distance that once made things easy was gone. There was no space left to ignore. No version of the past he could reshape. Just the reality standing in front of him. Clear, unavoidable. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan wasn't thinking about what came next. He was thinking about what he had missed. Lily didn't rush. She didn't push the moment forward. She simply turned slightly, resting a gentle hand on the older girl's shoulder. "This is Emma," she said. Emma didn't move. She kept her eyes on Ethan, steady, searching. "And this," Lily continued, glancing down, "is Sophie." Sophie gave a small wave, half shy, half curious. "Hi." Ethan looked at them again. Not the way you glance at strangers. This time, he looked. It didn't hit all at once. It came in pieces. The way Emma held her posture, careful, composed. The way Sophie's expression shifted quickly between curiosity and uncertainty. Small things, but familiar in a way that didn't make sense. Until it did. Ethan swallowed. Because suddenly this wasn't a situation. It was something else entirely. Emma stepped just a little closer again. Not enough to close the space completely. Just enough to study him. "You really didn't know?" she asked. There was no accusation in her voice. Just a need to understand. Ethan opened his mouth, then paused. Because answering that honestly meant admitting something he hadn't said out loud before. "No," he said finally. Emma held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once, as if that answer explained more than it fixed. Sophie looked between them, then back at Ethan. "Mom said you didn't stay," she said. Emma glanced at her quickly, but it was too late. The words were already there. Sophie continued, softer now. "I thought maybe she was wrong." Ethan felt that more than anything else that had been said. Because there was no edge to it, just honesty. The kind that doesn't try to hurt, but still does. "They started asking questions," Lily said quietly. Ethan looked at her. "I didn't know what to tell them at first." Her tone stayed calm, measured. "But kids don't stop asking just because you don't have the answer." She glanced at the girls briefly, then back at him. "So eventually, I told them your name. I tried to reach you," she added. "Not defensive, not emotional, just clear. A few times." Ethan's brow tightened slightly. I know," she said. And that was the part that settled everything. Not anger, not blame, just acceptance of what didn't happen. And after a while, she continued, it stopped feeling like something you missed. A small pause. And started feeling like something you weren't looking for. Ethan looked back at Emma and Sophie, and this time, it wasn't curiosity, it was realization. Birthdays he wasn't there for. First words he never heard. Moments that had already happened and couldn't be revisited. Not because he chose to miss them in the moment, but because he never knew they existed. His chest tightened, not sharply, just enough to stay there. Ethan started, then stopped, because there wasn't a version of this he could explain his way out of. No angle that made it smaller, no words that reshaped it into something easier. So instead, he said the only thing that felt real. I didn't know. Emma studied him again. Sophie just watched. And Lily, she didn't respond right away, because this moment wasn't about what he knew. It was about what he was going to do now that he did. Claire had been quiet, not distant, not frozen, just watching, taking in everything, the girls, Lily, Ethan's silence, the way the moment had shifted without warning. Then she moved. One step forward, close enough now to stand beside Ethan again, but not quite touching him. Most people would have looked at the situation. Claire looked at Ethan, the way his posture had changed, the way his responses weren't immediate anymore, the way control, his usual strength, was no longer leading him. She didn't need an explanation. She understood the weight of what had just entered his life. There was no sharp breath, no disbelief, no demand for answers. Claire didn't turn this into something louder than it already was, because she knew anything said in the wrong tone would break more than it fixed. So when she spoke, her voice was steady. Ethan. That was all. But it brought his attention back to her immediately. He turned toward her, still holding the weight of everything that had just been said. Claire, She shook her head slightly, not dismissing him, just guiding the moment. You don't need to explain it right now, she said. Her eyes held his, not searching, not accusing. Clear. Claire glanced briefly toward Emma and Sophie, then back to Ethan. This isn't something small, she continued. It's not something that waits until later. There was no emotion rising in her voice, just clarity, the kind that comes when someone sees the full picture all at once. Ethan's expression shifted again, this time not from surprise, but from something else. Conflict. I didn't know, he said, quieter now. I believe you, Claire replied, and she meant it. That was what made this harder, because belief didn't change what was standing in front of them. She took a small breath, not to steady herself, just to move forward. You need to go to them, she said. Ethan blinked slightly. Claire, no, she said softly, stopping him again. Not forcefully, just furfully enough. Not for me. A brief pause. For you. There was no anger in her expression, no sadness that demanded attention, just understanding, the kind that doesn't try to hold on to something when it knows it shouldn't. Ethan looked at her, searching for something, permission, resistance, anything that might make this easier, but she didn't give him either, because this wasn't about easing the moment, it was about facing it. Claire took a step back, not dramatic, not symbolic, just enough to give space, enough to shift where she stood in his life, without needing to say it out loud, and somehow, that quiet step carried more weight than anything she could have said. No one announced anything. No music stopped abruptly. No one rushed in to fix the moment. Instead, the rooftop shifted into something quieter. Conversations restarted, but softer. People began to leave in small groups, not wanting to linger where something personal had unfolded. What was supposed to be a celebration faded without needing to be declared over. Ethan hadn't moved much, not because he didn't know what to do, but because for once he wasn't rushing to do anything. The ring was still in his hand, closed now, almost forgotten. The space around him slowly opened as people stepped away, giving distance without being asked. And in that space, what mattered stayed. Emma and Sophie hadn't left. They stood a short distance away now, close enough to watch him, far enough not to overwhelm him. Sophie shifted her weight slightly, glancing up at Emma. Is he coming? She whispered. Emma didn't answer right away. She kept her eyes on Ethan. Give him a second, she said quietly. Not impatient, just understanding in a way that felt older than she was. Lily stood a few steps behind them. She didn't move closer, didn't call out to him. She had already said what needed to be said. Now, she waited, not for an answer, but for a choice. Ethan finally looked up again, not at the city, not at the emptying space around him, at them. Emma met his gaze first. Sophie followed a second later. There was no pressure in the moment, no expectation spoken out loud, just three people, waiting to see what he would do. Ethan took a step forward. It wasn't a big step, it didn't solve anything, but it mattered, because it was the first thing he had done all night that wasn't planned. Emma noticed. Sophie smiled slightly, small but real. And Lily, she exhaled quietly. Not relief, not yet, just acknowledgement, because for the first time since this began, Ethan wasn't standing still anymore. Ethan didn't stop after that first step. He walked toward them slowly, not because he was unsure, but because he was choosing each step instead of rushing through it. Emma stayed where she was. Sophie shifted slightly forward, curiosity winning over hesitation. By the time Ethan reached them, there wasn't much space left between them at all. Up close, everything felt more real. Not an interruption, not a situation, a reality. For a second, no one spoke. Then Ethan crouched slightly, lowering himself to their level. Not out of habit, out of instinct. "Hi," he said, simple, no rehearsing, no distance. Sophie smiled a little wider this time. "Hi." Emma watched more carefully. "You stayed," she said. It wasn't praise, it was observation. Ethan nodded once. "I said I would." Even as he said it, he realized he meant it. Ethan glanced between them, then back at Lily. "I don't know everything yet," he admitted. His voice was steady, but different now. Less controlled, more open. "But I'm here." Lily didn't respond immediately. She studied him, not searching for perfection, just truth, and for the first time, she didn't see him trying to manage the moment. They moved slightly away from the center of the rooftop. Not hidden, just quieter. The city carried on around them, but it no longer felt like the focus. "You don't have to figure everything out tonight," Lily said. Ethan shook his head lightly. "I'm not trying to." "Then what are you trying to do?" He looked at Emma and Sophie again. "Not miss it again." That landed, because it wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Sophie tilted her head slightly. "So, you're staying tomorrow too?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yes." Emma crossed her arms lightly, not defensive, just thinking. "You're not just saying that?" Ethan met her eyes. "No." A pause. Then Emma gave a small nod. Not full trust, but enough to continue. Lily watched the exchange quietly. No interruption, no guidance, because this part wasn't hers to control. She had already carried the weight for years. Now, it was his turn to show up. "You don't owe us anything tonight," she said finally. Ethan looked at her. "I do," he replied. She shook her head gently. "Not like that." A small pause. Just be here. Something in Ethan settled. Not everything, not completely, but enough. For the first time in a long time. He wasn't thinking about how this fit into his life. He was thinking about how to be part of theirs, and that changed everything. Ethan stood again, but he didn't step away. He stayed right there, with them, not checking his phone, not looking around, not calculating what came next, just present. And sometimes, that's the choice that matters most. Not the big one, the one that follows it. Morning didn't rush in. It arrived softly. No pressure, no expectations waiting at the door. Ethan stood by the window for a moment, looking out, not thinking about meetings, not checking messages, just still. That alone was new. A knock broke the quiet. Not loud, just enough. Ethan didn't pause this time. He walked to the door and opened it. Emma stood there first. Sophie slightly behind her. Lily a step back. No one said anything immediately. Then Sophie stepped in like she had already decided. "Hi," she said. Ethan smiled lightly. "Hi." Emma stayed where she was, watching. "You said you'd be here," Emma said. Ethan nodded. "I meant it." She studied him for a second longer, then stepped inside. Not fully relaxed, but no longer holding the doorway between them. Lily followed last, quiet as always. Not leading, not guiding, just present. They didn't sit down for a serious talk. No one suggested it. Instead, they stayed in the simple moment. Sophie wandered toward the couch, picking up something from the table. "You really live here?" she asked. Ethan let out a small breath, almost amused. "Yeah, it's very neat," she said. Emma glanced around. "Too neat." Ethan raised an eyebrow slightly. "Is that a bad thing?" Sophie nodded immediately. A little. That earned the first real laugh out of him. They didn't force questions. They didn't fill every silence. They just talked, short exchanges, simple observations. "What do you do all day?" Sophie asked. "Work, mostly." Emma tilted her head. "That sounds boring." Ethan smiled slightly. "Sometimes it is." Sophie nodded like that confirmed something important. It didn't take long for Ethan to notice the difference between them. Sophie spoke first, thought later. Emma watched first, decided later. One filled the space, the other measured it, and somehow it worked. Ethan adjusted without thinking, answering one, earning the other. Lily didn't interrupt. She sat nearby, listening, letting the moment belong to them. Every now and then her eyes shifted to Ethan, not checking, not questioning, just observing. And what she saw was different. At one point Sophie asked, "Do you always talk like that?" Ethan blinked. "Like what?" "Like everything is very serious." Emma didn't say anything, but she agreed. Ethan paused. Then he let out a quiet laugh. "Not always." "Good," Sophie said, "because it's a little boring." That time, the laugh came easier, and it stayed. Time passed without being measured. No one checked it. No one needed to. At some point, Emma sat down without thinking about where. Sophie leaned back like she had already decided she was comfortable. And Ethan, he didn't try to direct any of it, didn't adjust the moment, didn't shape it into something cleaner. He just let it be. Eventually, the conversation slowed. Not awkward, just settled. Sophie looked over at him. "Are we coming back tomorrow?" Ethan didn't hesitate. "If you want to." Emma glanced at Lily. Lily didn't answer for them. So Emma looked back at Ethan. "We'll see." It wasn't rejection, it was something better. A door left open, and Ethan nodded. "Okay," because for the first time, he understood something simple. This wasn't something you secured, it was something you showed up for, again and again and again. The first thing that changed wasn't obvious. No dramatic decisions, no sudden shift in his life. Just small adjustments. Ethan stopped trying to shape every moment. He didn't plan conversations before they happened. Didn't think 3 responses ahead. When Emma asked something, he answered. When Sophie laughed, he reacted. Simple, but different. Before, Ethan listened to respond. Now, he listened to understand. Emma noticed it first. "You don't interrupt anymore," she said one afternoon. Ethan blinked slightly. "Did I do that before?" She gave him a look. "Yes." He nodded once. "Okay, that's fair." Sophie smiled. "I like this version better." He didn't argue. Because quietly, he did too. His phone stayed untouched longer, not ignored, just not leading. Meetings got moved. Some calls didn't happen at all, not because he stopped caring about work, but because it stopped being the only thing that mattered. One afternoon, Sophie noticed, "You didn't check your phone all day." Ethan looked at it, then back at her. "I guess I didn't." She nodded like that confirmed something important. Instead of pulling them into his routine, he stepped into theirs, listening to stories that didn't need a point, watching them argue over small things that somehow mattered a lot, sitting through moments that weren't efficient but were real. Emma explained things carefully. Sophie explained nothing at all. Ethan learned both. Lily noticed before anyone said anything, the way Ethan didn't rush off after visits, the way he stayed in conversations longer, the way he didn't try to fix every silence. One evening she watched from a distance as Sophie told a story that made no sense, and Ethan listened like it did. That was new, and it mattered more than anything he could have said. There was a moment, small, almost forgettable, but it stayed. Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at it, paused, then turned it face down. Emma saw it. "You're not answering?" "Not right now," he said. "Why?" Ethan looked at her. "Because I'm here." That was it. No explanation, no justification. And somehow, that said everything. Change didn't announce itself. It didn't need to. It showed up in how he stayed, how he listened, how he stopped trying to control what didn't need controlling. Emma trusted him a little more. Sophie didn't question him as much, and Lily, she didn't say anything, but the way she looked at him had shifted, not back to what it was, but forward, into something new. And Ethan felt it, not his pressure, not his expectation, just something worth not walking away from. The apartment was quieter than usual. Emma and Sophie had fallen asleep earlier than expected, one on the couch, the other halfway through a sentence she didn't finish. Ethan had carried Sophie gently to the room. Emma followed on her own, pretending she wasn't already tired. Now, it was just him and Lily, The city outside continued as always, but inside, everything felt still. They didn't rush into conversation. They sat across from each other, the space between them no longer filled with tension, just time. Lily leaned back slightly, her hands resting loosely together. Ethan sat forward, not tense, just present. For once, neither of them seemed interested in avoiding what needed to be said. "I used to think I had everything figured out," Ethan said. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an explanation. Just a statement. Lily gave a small nod. "You thought you did. I built everything around that," he continued. She didn't interrupt, because she already knew. Ethan looked down briefly, then back at her. "I didn't realize what I was leaving behind," he said. Lily's expression softened, but only slightly. "You didn't look," she replied. There was no edge in her voice, just truth. Ethan nodded once. "I know." A pause. "I can't change that." "No," she said gently. "You can't." Silence settled again, but this time it didn't feel unfinished. It felt understood. "You're not trying to control it anymore," Lily said after a moment. Ethan let out a small breath. "I'm trying not to." She studied him, not the way she used to, searching for what was missing. This time she was seeing what was there. "You're here," she said. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "I am." They didn't define anything, didn't decide what came next, because they didn't need to. Not yet. For now, there was honesty, there was presence, there was something real without being forced into a shape too soon. Lily leaned back slightly, more at ease than before. Ethan stayed where he was. No need to move, no need to prove anything, and for the first time in a long time, what they had in that moment was enough. Morning came without urgency. No alarms driving the day, no schedule pulling him out the door. Ethan stood in the kitchen doing something he hadn't done in a long time. Nothing important, just waiting for the coffee to finish. Footsteps followed. Sophie walked in first, still half asleep. "You're still here," she said. Ethan smiled lightly. "Yeah." Emma appeared behind her, more awake, more observant. She didn't say anything right away, just nodded once. That was enough. Breakfast wasn't planned. It wasn't perfect either. Sophie decided what everyone should eat. Emma corrected her twice. Ethan followed both instructions without arguing. "You don't know how to do this, do you?" Sophie asked. "Not really," he admitted. "That's okay," she said. "We'll teach you." Emma glanced at him. "If you listen," Ethan nodded. "I will, and this time." It didn't feel like something he was saying just to keep things smooth. He meant it. Lily stood nearby, watching the moment unfold, not stepping in, not adjusting anything. Because she didn't need to. There was no pressure in the room, no conversation about what this meant, no expectation placed on what came next, just people learning each other. In real time. At some point, Ethan stepped back for a second, not to leave, just to take it in, the conversation, the movement, the way the girls spoke without holding back. None of it was structured, none of it was planned, and yet, it worked, better than anything he had ever tried to design. He let out a quiet breath, not heavy, not overwhelmed, just aware that this was what he had been missing. Ethan didn't make a promise out loud, didn't declare anything. He simply stayed where he was, present, listening, part of something that didn't need to be controlled to matter. And maybe that was the point. Not everything valuable comes from planning. Some things come from almost losing something and choosing not to walk away again. If this story stayed with you, even for a moment, ahead and like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the stories that matter most aren't the ones about perfection. They're the ones about what we choose to hold on to, and if he finally becomes clear what we almost lost.